Hello and welcome to Grey Matter Talks Tech, a podcast for dev and IT enthusiasts who want to hear insights, tips and stories from experts from across the tech industry. I'm your host for today, Leanne Bevan, Vendor Marketing Manager at Grey Matter. So who's Grey Matter? We're a software reseller and cloud service provider immersed in tech. We help businesses solve technical challenges and maximise opportunities. Today, I'm joined by our very own security expert, Scott Harrison, to talk about all things cybersecurity. Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to take part on this and hopefully provide some really useful information to customers who are going to be listening in.
Awesome, I'm sure you will. So to start us off, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Certainly. So I've been at Grey Matter a total of 8 years and been through a couple of different roles. Started off actually trying to sell mobile phones for Grey Matter, then worked myself into a business executive role selling Azure and cloud services in the very early days. Moved over to renewals and then, picked up the cybersecurity subject matter expert role in 2019. My general specialisms, I think I'm multi-hatted really. I do a lot of pre-technical consultations with our account managers and customers, helping them figure out what kind of cybersecurity needs they might have, and also doing a lot of business development, making sure that we stay close to the vendors and publishers that we work with in cybersecurity, staying up to date with all the new technologies and emerging products that they might have that we feel will be the best fit for our customer security requirements as well.
So what made you interested in pursuing a role in cybersecurity within Grey Matter?
I have to track right back to when I started at Grey Matter, which when it came round to my 8th year yesterday, I was like, was it really 8 years? One of the first training sessions or first spiff days that was ever held in the early days was actually ESET coming in, and it was a chap called Lee. And having always had an interest in technology and IT and computers, I built every computer that I've owned, massive PC gamer as well.
Oh wow.
I'd known about antivirus and always knew it was important to have it. But then when Lee presented what it meant for businesses, and back then, would I say it's as critical as it now or as it is in everybody's mind? No. But it was still really interesting to see some of the risk that it had to businesses and why they need to think about it. And from that point, I'd always, and I guess that this was also when I went into renewals as well, I started actually selling or renewing a lot more customers on the vendors that we work with and got to know them, and again what each one had as a value add and what their specific skill set was and what products they had to cover those customers for cybersecurity. And as you can appreciate, from 2012 to now, and being able to go into a role that is fully focused on cybersecurity when I just had that fleeting interest back in 2012 has been an amazing journey, and it always stays interesting. There's always a different requirement and always a different story happening or something else that the customer might have experienced from a day to day that we either we're helping them with, or providing them advice on the right products or right services that they might need to combat that. And that's also what interested me. It's not just about learning about all the geeky stuff and some of the really intricate and technical stuff, but it's also providing that endpoint solution to a customer, whatever it might be, and making sure that you've done a thorough enough job that they're protected as well.
Yes, of course. You kind of touched on it there. Cybersecurity seems to be so much more important now. It's always in the headlines, new guidelines are being released. Why do you think that is?
I think it's definitely a change in habit and I'm going to talk about the cyber criminal element here and the trend and change that has occurred on that side. Now, I'm going to sit here and admit that back in my teenage days when I was 15, 16 and I was doing my GCS IT, that was the start of my interest in computers and PC gaming, and also messing about with basic Visual Basic scripts. And we created some really weird and funny stuff that used to create pop-up messages. So you used to send this script to someone via MSN Messenger, if anybody remembers that, and they would open it, and it would just constantly pop up pop-up windows. So back in the day, that was kind of what hacking was about. There was a slightly disestablishment factor to it and causing disruption. The change in the last few years has been about not damaging or disreputing what a company does. It is all about financial gain. And what's slightly scary is that this has become almost a commercialized product for some of the cyber criminal groups that are out there. They're almost effectively and actively marketing their services and ransomware as a service. And we talk about as a service products now in the cloud world all the time, backup as a service, software as a service. But ransomware as a service where someone can just go buy one of these tools to infect somebody or hold them to account for some money or whatever it might be, leakage of data, that has become a much scarier thought, that it's become almost a commercialized entity. And it's becoming harder with things like AI now coming into the fold. That's going to make it more difficult to anticipate where attacks might come from, because AI is being used in email phishing campaigns now. It has been used to create malware. Things like deepfake, and best example that I've cited recently was the deepfake video for a Hong Kong bank last year, where they managed to get away. I think it was with $25 million or something similar, because they deepfaked a video and audio of their finance director. So, like I said, it's not just this commercial aspect, but AI, as useful as it is in the future, and I think is going to cause even more headlines. Not to mention supply chain, again, that has been on the top of everyone's mind for the last 5 or 6 years. It doesn't matter whether you're a small supply chain, like, I don't know, you might be providing tools and parts to the emergency services, or you're a massive supermarket or utilities. There have been examples in the last couple of years of utilities services in America. I think it was Con Edison or one of the gas providers out there had their systems ransomware and hacked. So it's all, as I say, I've talked about fear. There is a massive shift and a thinking of how bad can this get in the future, but also I think that's going to drive a lot of the vendors, and we're already seeing this, starting to work together and collaborate on making sure that the IT world and businesses and critical services stay protected as well. And it's only really started to happen in the last year or so, but I really, really hope that continues to be an effort for everybody to work together, still with some competition, because there's nothing like competition to make things interesting, but we still want them to work from a technology perspective to make sure that we're staying in front of all these threats and everything that I've just talked about.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds terrifying, or like the commercialization you mentioned there, and the supply chain attacks as well, and AI. Like, you kind of answered my next question really around kind of what are the key security trends you're seeing. So, excluding those three that you've just touched upon, are there any other trends that you're seeing a lot of, or you expect throughout this year or perhaps next year?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the evolving threat landscape, threat intelligence, will become again a big factor in how businesses are detecting attacks and getting better visibility. You're seeing a lot of shift to managed security service providers, but also customers now using um, out of the box security operations center services and managed detection and response services as well, covering
Hmm.
them in 24/7, and that will help with the evolving threat landscape. Um, the next thing really is the complexity of some of the cybersecurity. Now, whether that be the expanding number of frameworks that are being brought into place. So we know some of this stuff that is in place already that is becoming less complex because that people are getting a better understanding. So things like Cyber Essentials, Standard and Plus, things like GDPR, which has been around for a number of years and now better understood. But it's the incoming changes and some of the new schemes that are making things a little bit more difficult to navigate and putting more emphasis on the end user and the business that provides services, uh, and the responsibility of reporting if they have an incident as well. So things like the NIST 2 framework that was brought into the
Hmm.
EU and DORA that went live last month are all about um, being more thorough in protecting data, but also in how quickly and how they report any incidents that they have, and the technology reporting the technology that they're using in order to prove that they're meeting those frameworks as well. The other complexity, and again, this is why
Yeah.
more businesses talked about the managed detection and the SOC services piece, skills and actually getting the right people is becoming a lot more difficult. There's certainly, and I think the shortfall, or a small number that saw that last year, is that the shortfall in the UK was around about 10,000 people in terms of skills
Wow.
gaps. And there's so many things that you could actually consider that might influence that right now. I certainly think that, and they are doing more. There are more government courses becoming better advertised at college level for students to undertake some of
Yeah.
these roles. But some of these legacy roles where knowledge needs to be passed on, it hasn't quite happened. But also, it's the wage gap. If a business is looking to build, let's say they were looking to build their own SOC in house, they've got to invest a significant amount of money in technology, but also just as much now in terms of getting the right people to come and look after that
Mm.
24/7. I think the average wage that I saw was something like 75, 80K for a cybersecurity analyst to come into the business. And that's kind of expected by them now, because the business is going to sit there and go, well, without this person and without us paying this person to be there and without us paying for the service, we're at risk.
And so is that why more businesses are turning to managed security services like managed detection and response?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's all about resourcing, and let's face it, a lot of businesses are having to cut back based on increased business costs. Certainly in the UK, we've had customers mention to us recently about energy bills being a lot
Mm.
more, some mentioning about the national insurance changes that are going to cost them more, that have affected budgeting decisions. So where do you make those changes? Well, sometimes it's, well, do we need all those IT people? And you cut people back, and you go from a team, one example I can think of, it went from having a team of 8 people to only having 4. So they halved it
Wow.
because they needed to claim some budget back. So that's 8 people to 4, and all looking after it, and then all looking after, I think it was nearly 200 employees, and looking after the security for it. So it's a resource thing at business, but also it's a cost perspective as
Yeah.
well. Because a lot of the time when you look at across the vendors that we have that can provide these managed detection and managed security services, they'll cost half or maybe even more than that to get in place and have someone do it all for you than it will be to try and set it up yourself and get a good practice in place. So long may that continue, and we will continue to beat that drum and explain the best we can to customers that and I have this prediction that within the next couple of years, certain verticals or certain parts, certain industries, certainly I'd say finance or anybody that deals with local government or Ministry of Defence, I've got this, uh, I wouldn't say fear, but I've got this sort of logical tracking that they will start to mandate customers having some form of 24/7 monitoring across, whether it be whatever they're doing, whether it be endpoint security, whether it be firewalls. I think they will start to make it mandatory on some of the certifications that or if you're in a certain industry, that they will do that. But it's a prediction rather than an actual fact right now. But because of the way things are accelerating, for me, it might be the way it needs to happen. Some of these businesses may need to be forced into thinking about this or adopting that strategy because they could be coming under consistent attack.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had that was actually a reference. I went to a Sophos event last year, and one of their guys who worked in the threat intelligence center said, "Always assume you're under attack." Now, you can't ever think you're not going to be
No.
when it comes to cybersecurity.
Well, especially not if there's ransomware as a service and AI against us as well.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So you also mentioned some frameworks there. Are there any particular frameworks that our listeners should be aware of and should be following, and like any challenges that they might come against trying to like comply with them?
Yeah, I certainly think if you're based in the UK, one of the most basic frameworks that everybody should look at and look at achieving is the Cyber Essentials standard certification. That is a baseline function and links in quite closely with a new service that we're introducing called the 7 layers of cybersecurity. Goes from a front to back of, okay, well, how are your users accessing your network? Do you have endpoint antivirus installed? Are you using a firewall? Do you actively look for patches for any software that you use? There's seven points to that framework, and the 7 layer security assessment that we offer to customers goes through exactly the same things, and it gives you a great baseline to work from. And then if you feel that you need to work outwards from there, and that might be for, I don't know, maybe you want to achieve, you want to go for a cyber insurance policy. That's a great starting point because it gives you a baseline and allows you to test at a basic level what you're doing, and you've got a standardized approach to your security. Next up from that, and again, this links very closely to cyber insurance if you're going for that one, is Cyber Essentials Plus. That becomes a little bit more advanced and it goes a little bit deeper and adds a few more bullet points to those 7 main areas. Outside of that, other ones that you would need to consider if you're working with a lot of, I'll say, public data or customer data. Certainly, if you're working with local government or you handle sensitive information, ISO 2701, and achieving that one as it's a very difficult framework to achieve is definitely worth doing. And again, we can offer assistance with that and help you get through it and help you do every part of it. Other ones that have started to come in, if you work in Europe, NIST 2 is definitely worth a look, but not absolutely essentially for a UK business. The other framework, which it's not a certification as such, it's more of a guidance protocol. And again, something that I feel is going to become a lot more adopted over the next couple of years and a lot more recognized is the Microsoft Zero Trust framework. We've seen a lot of customers migrate to M365 throughout COVID and over the last few years, going cloud, remote working. It's a lot better. But with it comes the challenges of security because people access might not always be accessing from home. So Microsoft Zero Trust framework or any kind of Zero Trust framework for me is good to start looking at it now and considering it versus your traditional solutions such as DNS security or just using MFA. It needs to all be paired up now to make sure you've got a secure entry point. Fortunately, with all of those, there haven't been any dramatic changes on Cyber Essentials or ISO for a number of years. But as I said a moment ago, expect it. And there are many other theories that I've got around what might be added to some of the cyber essential stuff as time moves on and it starts to synchronize with the cyber insurance requirements as well. But I could go on maybe for another half hour about that. So we'll leave that for another day and let customers contact me if they want to hear that kind of thing.
No problem. You mentioned cyber insurance there. Could you explain what it is, the considerations, and how we can help people with it?
Yeah, so insurance is an insurance product is much like it is for everything else that you might own, whether it be your home or your contents or your car. It's businesses protecting themselves and covering their backs from the growing intensity and the complexity of the cybersecurity threats that are out there. Some figures that I can give you are or changes in attitude are that 88% of board members or C-suite classified cybersecurity as a business risk. So that's a massive change. So previously, a lot of them were calling it a technology risk, and that shifted to only 12%, and that's straight from Gartner. Cybersecurity is not only about operations now; it is about securing your data, and what that might be. And again, using customer examples that we've got, it might be one of our ISVs and their development data, their development network gets hacked and they can't access it. It might be a business that sells, I don't know, products. They might have a commerce website and they get ransomware, then they can't sell anything. It means they're not making money. And that's why cyber insurance is put in place. It's in the event of worst case scenario. It's important to go through. It can increase your chances of survival, but there are also some kind of holes that you need to look out for as well. So most cyber insurance policies now, you can expect them to cover data loss. They will cover incident response costs. They'll actually come and do forensic analysis of the event and tell you all about what happened, where it might have come from, and where it started, where it ended. They'll even cover liabilities stemming from any network security failures and also costs from business interruption. And all of this has been famously termed as more valuable than gold. Securing the data is not just about knowing exactly where the information is and what it's doing. It's become much more than that, which is why you've got all of that as a coverage. Traditional insurance policies before this became more popular were like a general liability insurance, and they had errors and omissions of coverage that didn't really specifically address cyber incidents and are unlikely to redress any cybersecurity claims. So before some of this got popular, there was this liability, so it's worth people going back and checking if they've done stuff in the past and they think they might be covered for cybersecurity insurance. Just check what you've got. Whilst all that is good and it's increasing the chances of business survival, and that's what it's all about. You can talk about, okay, you've got every bit of technology that you've got, but this is the final fail point. there there's things that they might not cover, and I like to call this the grey area, and this is because it's not very well regulated right now. Again, is it something I think will change? I think it will do.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the whole Bitcoin scenario across different countries who've now started to put litigation in, put regulation in, start to tax, etc., etc. It needs to be changed because there are a lot of common policy exceptions where they will leverage, insurers will leverage data to improve their loss ratios through stricter underwriting, and they'll increase rates for doing it as well. So some of the common policy exceptions are they won't cover financial fraud from social engineering. So if your business was attacked by spear phishing, by email compromise, for instance,
Yeah.
they'll often say that the lost funds are not reimbursable if they were paid voluntarily by an employee or a business.
I was going to say, does that stress the importance of cybersecurity awareness training then within an organization?
Yeah, exactly what I was going to follow up with. You read my mind. So when you talk about email security, that's the one way of combating that is by giving better employee awareness training. So they and in fact, I've recently redone the yearly training that we do, and one of those courses talks about, look, if you do compromise yourself by email, and they ask you to pay, or they're going to release damaging information about you, which is usually complete rubbish anyway. They say don't. It says specifically on that training, don't pay for it. Where else you can link this to, and I think this is something to consider as well, is that when you talk about paying for ransomware, or you're paying for an email compromise, Australia recently brought a law in that said that if you pay a ransomware cost, they class it as a criminal or terrorism offence. And
Oh,
there are
really?
lots of companies that, lots of countries, sorry, that are now looking at bringing this into law, because that's sometimes what you are funding. So that's one of the first common exceptions where they won't pay. The second is that, let's say, obviously, you get attacked, and they'll help you with, as we said, with all the investigation, and they'll help you pay the cost to remediate any problems that happened as well. What they won't do is cover any costs of you increasing or adding more to your cybersecurity protection layers, or buying new products, or say you wanted to invest in managed detection services. They won't cover that cost, and that can actually be an expense, and they'll
Yeah.
reduce the amount that they will cover them by as well once they've had an attack. The next one is geographic restrictions. So let's say you've got a company, same name, that has a UK based office. Let's say you have an office in France, and then you have an office in America, and you have an office in Ireland. So your Ireland office gets attacked, but you've bought a cyber insurance policy that is based in the UK. There are lots of situations where operations outside the home country will not be covered by that policy that's been taken out in the UK. So with that one, is kind of asking the question at the time when you take this stuff out. I've got offices here, there, and everywhere. Is this policy going to cover it? Because in worst case scenario, they might turn around and say, sorry, UK office is only covered with that one. Next up on the list is nation state attacks or acts of war. So an example from Lloyd's of London and some others, policies have clauses explicitly denying coverage for any attacks that are declared acts of war or attributed to a nation state actor. So we have seen in the last few years that countries like North Korea, China have had influential hacking groups that have attacked companies and governments as well. So they will disclude that from a policy. Again, one that I think really hits home with some of our customers, especially ISVs and developers. They will have a reduced value of intellectual property. So if any exfiltration happens of proprietary materials like product designs or code, a business losing its IP through a cyber attack, it can be really harmful. It's massively harmful,
Mm.
but it's usually excluded from a cyber insurance policy. And the final one that has started to become is one that they've started adding in recently, and it's because of that first point I made earlier on about ransomware as a service. There are a growing number of limitations, and it's becoming an add-on to a cyber insurance policy, not included anymore. So you actually have to pay for it separately, almost as a like a bolt-on, like a mobile
Really?
contract in effect.
No.
So it's like, okay, we'll cover all this, but actually, if you want ransomware cover, you're going to have to pay us this much extra
Wow.
to make sure that you're covered against ransomware. So you've got two levels of it. It's such a useful thing, and it is, and I recommend getting cyber insurance on top of going for one of those standard frameworks I talked about. But it's important to read through the policy documentation and what they're going to cover you on to make sure that you've got the right level of engagement and coverage for your business as well. And following up with, like you asked, how can we help with that?
Yeah.
We've actually got a great product or great vendor who can help with the Cyber Essentials that I talked about and Cyber Essentials Plus, but also provide you with a cyber insurance product off the back of that, which will cover you up to 100k. And because it's all linked together and you do all of the certification through a platform and it's all assessed by a human being, as soon as you've got all those boxes ticked, you qualified for the cyber insurance and you're covered. So we can make it easier for you rather than you having to trudge through that framework and work out what am I covered for, what am I not covered for. Come speak to us about CyberSmart and we'll make that journey for you a lot easier if you try to work out all these little black holes that are there for cyber
Yeah.
insurance that I've just talked about.
Yeah, that sounds like there's quite a few. So thank you for explaining all of that. Um, I do actually know a customer that I spoke to recently that used CyberSmart and said it only took them kind of a few months or so to go through the process using the platform rather than had they done it themselves, which they reckon would have taken a year. So it saves a lot of time as well, having that
Yep,
platform and
absolutely.
the resource.
Yep.
And would you say cyber insurance is suitable for customers of all sizes, or is it just the bigger companies or the smaller one, or does it apply everywhere?
If you'd have asked me that 4 years ago, and I'm talking pre-COVID here, 2020, I'd have said no. But that quote I mentioned earlier on, where always assume that you're under attack,
Hmm.
I don't think it matters the size of business that you are these days. If you're making money and a cyber criminal finds a way of exploiting your business or finds a way in, they will find a way in and they will take advantage. So, yeah, like I say, 4 or 5 years ago when I first got into the industry, I'd have said not everybody needs it.
Hmm.
Now, I think it doesn't matter what size business you've got, it should be a consideration and you should really think about taking it out.
Yeah, for sure. And so you've mentioned some quotes and stats throughout our discussion. Are there any other kind of useful use cases or headlines or statistics that you've seen around cybersecurity that you think our listeners should be aware of or keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about ransomware and how that's become a much more commercialized entity. To give you an idea of the average cost of a data breach, it was around 4.88 million in 2024, which has been the highest averaged on record. Um,
It's incredible. Wow.
yeah, it's a hell of a lot, and it's just going to get worse and worse. We are about to come to the end of the quarter, and TLDR, usually send out some statistics. So I'm very intrigued to see at the end of March what numbers we've got, and there have been some very high profile attacks happen already. Certainly not in the UK, but over in the States. And actually, in the last week, we've seen, and this is a first as well, I will say this, Bitly, which is a Bitcoin operation, had, I think it was a billion worth of cryptocurrency stolen.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And that they've said that all that was mentioned in the 2 news articles or 3 that I've read about this was a security vulnerability. So for a company like that who handles money, to have someone just come in and steal electronic money themselves, it's an electronic bank robbery. Now, we can always talk about ransomware and you're paying for it, but that's someone actually infiltrating and stealing it live. It's crazy. It sounds crazy to me. So, yeah, I'd be, with that happening, I'm going to be really intrigued to see what the first quarter of this year looks like. You already mentioned cybersecurity awareness training when we were talking about the cyber insurance piece. 88% of breaches are caused by human error. It is really high. 68% of breaches actually involved a human element in 2024. And that, we talked about that email piece. That's the bit that is really increasing, and that's how a lot of the cyber criminals are gaining entry. It's by someone clicking a link in an email or doing, opening something that they shouldn't do. Well, that's where cybersecurity awareness training becomes really important. And I've talked about predictions earlier on, and I said zero trust framework. Wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a requirement for some businesses. I certainly feel that security awareness training, that's something that is becoming mandatory on cyber insurance policies. I think it will become part of frameworks in the future as well. So some of these certifications will say maybe on Cyber Essentials Plus, prove that you're providing a minimum level of security training for your employees before you can pass. And again, in the last year, we've actually picked up an additional 2 vendors to KnowBe4 who can provide security awareness training. So I can truly say now, whatever your budget might be, we probably have a security awareness training product that you'll be able to leverage and help protect your business even further and cover that human element. So come and speak to us about it. The average, and obviously we just talked about breaches. The average time to actually detect a breach and identify it has gone up to 194 days. It's no longer smash and grab. It's go in, sit there, a compromised account or whatever it might be, and look what's going on. Look who logs in. Look where people put files. Where are the backups going? If they hack a server. So they're spending time and finding the absolute pain points and then taking advantage of it when they find it out. Further to that, you've got all the bits that I've talked about today and something called cybersecurity fatigue. It's an apathy to proactively defend against cyber attacks. And that affects as much as 42% of companies. And like I say, if you've got less resource to deal with all this stuff that might be happening, you're just going to go, well, okay, we're going to automate some of that, or, we're only going to provide a certain amount of coverage for it. And it just becomes more of a risk. We've already talked about supply chain enough and AI prioritization and the ransomware as a service, but something else, and we were a day after the anniversary of this happening. 97% of organizations have actually seen an increase in cyber threats since the start of the Russia and Ukraine war in 2022. So even geopolitical events, and you can actually say this about the bits that are going on over in Israel as well, have caused groups to pop up and state-sponsored attacks happening. So this just adds to that whole bit we talked about at the beginning, and who knows, some of these statistics just keep rising year on year. So as I say, it'd be interesting to see where we are at the end of the first quarter of this year, and certainly at the end of this year, where we will be as well, considering we've just had an election in the US and some other things that are coming up. So yeah, we will wait and see.
Yeah, we certainly will. Yeah, it's quite a scary world out there, I think, when it comes to cybersecurity and attacks. Are there any particular industries that you think are particularly vulnerable or more likely to be attacked? My initial thoughts are thinking maybe finance and healthcare, because there's obviously quite a lot of critical information, but is that right?
Yeah, you would still put those two in the top three of the list. We certainly saw last year in the UK that there were a couple of attacks on NHS services. I think there was
Yeah.
a trust in London that all of their booking and appointment systems went down, and one which handled lab and test results also went down as well. And yeah, the finance industry is always a target because they're generally the ones that have got the most money. Um, the other vertical that certainly has a painted target on his back, and you've seen a lot of ransomware attacks on them and data breaches in the last 2 years, is education. I know there are a couple of universities and a lot of school and academy trusts that had incidents as well, and paid for ransomware or had data stolen from internal systems about staff and pupils. So they're the top three, and anybody in supply chain gets also added into that. They're the most at risk. But I'll go back to it again for the third time, and what that chap said at Sophos last year. Always assume you're under attack. So everybody needs to be thinking more about it, and even if you think you're at a low risk, and a great example I've got is a customer who they were a manufacturing company, and they kept lots of diagrams on a Dropbox account. And initially, when we talked to them, we said, okay, how do you back that up? Do you employ any kind of two-factor authentication on logging into that and collaborating? And their answer was no. And it wasn't, I don't think it was literally 3 months later, they came back and said, we actually had an incident where someone tried to brute force in with an admin login, but they failed to get in. And it was at that point we started talking to them more about employing, moving this over to Microsoft SharePoint, getting better security on it, and actually backing the data up as well. So, and they considered themselves to be at low risk because they were in manufacturing. They did very bespoke. I think it was boat building or something similar. So they didn't consider themselves to be at a massive risk, but having that one incident changed their attitude. And I hate to say it, but that's sometimes the only thing that will spring customers into thinking about their securities if they have something major happen. And I think the word I will use is it's disappointing that sometimes that is what causes someone to think about it more as a focus, because with all of the bits that we've mentioned today, it is becoming more of a risk. It is growing. They are getting more intelligent around attacking even small businesses. So yeah, keep thinking about it. But those three: finance, education, local government, you would also put into that list as well, are all on the high risk tree there.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the importance of being proactive. But then, what if someone is attacked? You mentioned that you have had a client that has. What should organisations do if they are attacked?
So one of the best things that you can do, again, and I always talk about being ahead of the game on this, is if you haven't considered putting in an incident response plan already, then have a look at doing that. because having something or a plan of action where you can almost break the seal on an envelope and go, right, this is what we do now and this is what we need to, we've planned for, will help you out massively. And again, we've got partners such as Secure Impact that can actually provide you some advice and provide you with almost a framework in creating an incident response plan. But in the worst case scenario, let's say you don't have that, then immediately get on the phone to us and we can put you in touch with, again, 2 different vendors that we work with that have incident response services. So they are actually designed and you pay them to come and help get you out of any situation you might be in, whether that be tracking back to see where the attack happened, helping you decrypt the ransomware, helping you remove malware, and again, just the whole 360 approach to investigating and getting you through that scenario, and also reporting it to the relevant bodies if you need to as well. So don't sit and try and figure it out yourself, or to quote Hitchhikers from the Galaxy, don't panic. Just pick up the phone. Let us get you in touch with the right people that can provide that cyber incident response, and we shall get you the information that you need. I could go through a list of absolute basic things you can do in terms of that cyber incident response plan. But again, better coming and speaking to me about that in detail, because I'd probably be here for another hour if I went through absolutely everything that you might want to do in that situation.
Yeah, of course, no problem. And I'll make a quick note as well on the proactive side. It's also worth testing everything that you have in place. I'm guessing that's quite important too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as well as the cyber incident response plan, I've obviously talked about Secure Impact as a partner. One of the best things that you can do post doing something like your Cyber Essentials certification or your Cyber Essentials Plus certification is to get a pen test done, because that will look at all the gaps. And again, we've got certain customers of ours that make a software product, have actually got them to come and pen test their production environments to make sure that they're secure for their customers as well. It's going through with a fine tooth comb, but also you do that first test, you fix the gaps that you've got, and then you test again, and then you test every year to make sure that those gaps have remained closed, and you're picking anything up new that's become apparent as well. But there's also other things that you could actually help prepare you. So again, Secure Impact offer an M365 security assessment, as do our own Cloud Global Services in-house. They can help you get your Microsoft estate up to standard for M365 and help you get in the right technologies to provide you protection, such as conditional access, Entra, Intune, Defender for endpoint, Sentinel, whatever it might be you want to employ. Outside of that, again, if you've got an Azure environment that you want to secure, both Secure Impact and Climb Global Services on our side can help you prepare for that. We have a cloud security assessment that Secure Impact do, and of course, Climb Global Services provide a health check service that will go through the 5 best working practices of Azure, one of those which is based around security and operations, and tell you exactly where you might be. I will use the word failing here. You might have some failures that you need to fix. So all of this, and I've said it once or twice before, it's about staying in front and doing this before an event can happen. Now, you might not need to do it all, depending on the size of your business, but again, that's where we can provide you with that advice and go through with you and say, well, okay, what have you got in place now? Where do you want to be? And we can get you the right services, or come up with a proposal to say if you're needing to meet a certain budget. But whatever it might be in terms of preparation, we've got services or people that will be able to advise. So yeah, pick up the phone and come and speak to us.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you ever so much for running through the beast that is cybersecurity. And you've covered so much today. So thank you for that. It's been really useful finding out about the trends that you mentioned, and particularly the stuff around cyber insurance. That was really interesting, and really worrying about the stats that you said as well. So fingers crossed, I think if more people are more proactive, hopefully in the future these stats will go down. But who knows of how comprehensive these cyber attacks are. So yeah, thank you so much again, Scott, for joining us.
No, happy as always, and yep, look forward to speaking to any customers that listen in and want to find out a bit more. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for those listening, in the future seasons of the podcast, Scott and I will be talking to industry experts to delve deeper into some of the topics and the technologies that we've spoken about today. If you have any questions for Scott, please connect with him on LinkedIn. You can just search for his name, Scott Harrison, or you can email us info@greymatter.com and we can make sure it gets to him there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Grey Matter Talks Tech. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast to hear from more experts from across the industry. Bye for now.